The Landini murder case is a rare jewel in the world of old-time radio detective programs. The detective is none other than Charlie Chan, one of the most popular American detectives of the 20th century. And this serial is one of only two serialized stories that have endings available. And any American-made Charlie Chan programs are quite rare. Outside of those two serials, most of the circulating Charlie Chan episodes are from Australia. In addition to that, the story is the longest, mostly complete mystery serial that we have from the golden age of radio. It's a 39-chapter mystery story told in quarter-hour installments with an ending. The problem with the Landini murder case is that it starts with part 7. And that right there can make it intimidating to many listeners. What happened in the first 6 episodes? What did those original listeners to the Landini murder mystery in the mid-1930s know if they listened to it from the beginning that you would not know if you were sitting down to it as a modern listener? The good news is that you can mostly figure out what's going on. A lot of plot details are mentioned multiple times. The recaps provided by announcer Don Wilson at the beginning of the program often include key details, and you pick up a lot on who these characters are and what their relationship is to each other. But it does take a while because there are so many characters that it can be a bit overwhelming. But eventually, most people can figure out what's going on. But do they have to? When I first began recording the Landini murder case for my podcast, I assumed the answer to the question was yes. However, my memory was jogged, and I remembered someone saying once, or I'd read somewhere once, that this was actually based on a novel. And I found the name of the novel on a Charlie Chan fan website, and lo and behold, this novel had the same characters and the same general storyline as the radio serial. I recorded a synopsis of the novel for the 5th podcast episode of this serial to make sure that all the listeners who started listening at the beginning of my time running Charlie Chan will be all up to speed. And then I went ahead and edited that into the very first episode of the serial. Eventually, I will edit that 5th podcast so that it doesn't contain the explanation, as future listeners to that particular episode will have already heard it on the first episode. However, YouTube makes that a bit harder because YouTube believes that editing something once you posted it is for wimps. I'm sure it's on an official page somewhere. So I can't actually edit the YouTube episodes. And I don't want people in the future, when they watch the Landini murder mystery, to have to wait until 5 podcasts in to find out what's going on. So I'm making this a separate YouTube video, which will go at the top of the appropriate playlist. Now we'll briefly talk about the literary origin of the Landini murder case. And this was based on a novel by Earl Durr Biggers. It was published the year before he died in 1932. The novel was entitled The Keeper of the Keys. And it was actually the only novel he wrote that was not adapted to film. All the others were used in one form or another in the Charlie Chan film franchise. This was adapted as a stage play, however. Ran for 1 month in the fall of 1933 and starred William Harrigan as Charlie Chan. And the play may have influenced creative decisions that went into the Landini murder mystery. It's hard to say as we don't have the script. In addition, the play and the radio drama would have different goals in mind. The goal of the play would be to condense a 316-page novel into a 2-act play. The play would have the goal of, in some cases, expanding on the novel and also arranging information and events in such a way as to allow the placement of cliffhangers, 38 of them to be precise. All that said, let's go ahead and talk about the plot of The Keeper of the Keys up to the point of the start of the circulating radio episodes. The Keeper of the Keys begins with Charlie Chan on a train to California, where his place in society as a celebrated detective is established. He's in California mostly as a vacation, but also had an intriguing invite to visit a wealthy man named Dudley Ward. Ward has called an unusual dinner party where, except for Inspector Chan, all the guests have one thing in common. They were married to the same woman, the famed singer Ellen Landini. She's currently in the process of divorcing husband number 4, Luis Romano, so she can marry a young singer 15 years her junior. Ward was the first husband, and none of them really bear any acrimony towards each other. He has called the others together along with Charlie Chan because he was told that Landini had a son within a few months of leaving him and gave the son to a family to raise to spite him and hid the child's existence. Ward had hoped that maybe she'd accidentally let something slip to one of the other ex-husbands, or they'd accidentally seen something about the existence of his son, but all of them disclaim any knowledge of this child. However, their visit isn't entirely in vain because he's invited another after-dinner guest, Ellen Landini, who is over in Reno, completing the required wait in order to get her divorce from Mr. Romano. Ward determines to put the question directly to Landini to show that he's serious about this. He's reached out to the other husbands, and he's engaged the great detective Charlie Chan. He is going to pursue this, and it would just be easier for everyone and far more pleasant if she just told him where his son was. However, Landini denies that she had a child ever, and intimates that Ward had been fed false information by his maid Cecile. More on that in a minute. Ward had assumed that Landini would be in a hurry to leave. The way the book interprets Nevada law is that if Landini was outside of the state of Nevada after midnight, that her entire wait period for divorce would have to start all over again. However, Landini is perfectly fine to linger because she will be back in Nevada and has planned a dramatic exit from her ex-husband's estate by private airplane. However, that's not what happens. While the plane is making its approach at around 11 o'clock at night, Chan hears a shot, runs up to where Landini was, and finds that she has been shot. And pretty soon the whole household is there, and he begins a preliminary investigation with the intent of handing matters over to the local authorities. What he finds are a whole lot of suspects and potential suspects. Of course, there are the 4 exes. Ward had an acrimonious breakup with Landini over her decision to pursue her singing career, although he seems to be over that, and killing her would invalidate his stated purpose of finding his lost son. Husband number 2 was John Ryder, but the book, at least in the early stages before the murder occurs, doesn't tell us a whole lot about their marriage, other than it was the shortest of Landini's marriages. Before she died, Landini had sent Chan to ask Ryder to come talk to her, and Ryder declined, and the book described Ryder regarding her body coldly and without any sort of pity or feeling. Husband number 3 was Dr. Swan, whose breakup had been precipitated by Landini having an affair with her chauffeur. However, in a twist, Landini didn't get what she wanted, as the chauffeur was stolen away by a maid, and she ended up marrying Romano. The chauffeur, Michael Ireland, had come to be a charter airplane pilot and was in fact the pilot who was picking up Landini. And his wife was Cecile, the maid for Ward. What a very likely coincidence. Romano viewed himself as key to Landini's career taking off and maintaining success, as he brought discipline and structure to it that allowed her to succeed and continue to thrive and be professional. But trying to be a stern business manager and a spouse is a horrible combination, and so I'm kind of sympathetic to why Landini might have wanted to end the marriage. In a noteworthy scene where Landini meets Hugh Beaton, he asks him how many cigarettes he allows Landini to smoke. Beaton responds that how much she smokes is her own affair and that he's only interested in love. Romano responds that if Landini smokes too much, it will ruin her voice and career, and that she needs to have rules and limitations. And then, without Beaton asking for it, he goes upstairs to write down a list of rules for the young man to enforce on Landini. In addition to this, Romano had a major financial beef with Landini. She had signed a financial settlement and had failed to provide him with the required support. Part of the reason he agreed to come out and meet Ward was because Ward offered him money and he needed it desperately. Ward's longtime family servant, Ah Sing, who's been with the family since Ward was a boy, was also in the house at the time of the killing. We're told that Ah Sing is in his 70s, but as was not uncommon for many people born in the mid-19th century, he wasn't exactly sure how old he was. It's obvious that Ah Sing knows more than he's letting on, which makes him a suspect, although figuring out an exact motive is kind of hard. The other suspect is Leslie Beaton, Hugh's sister, and I feel like the surviving episodes are not clear on why she's suspected or what her motive might be, although it's hinted at. She's suspected for a couple reasons. First, a scarf belonging to her was found near Landini's body. Second, she was in a room near where the murder was committed, although she claimed to be unable to hear much because of the thickness of the walls. Her motive is referenced at one episode briefly as her thought that Landini was ruining her brother, but it was a little vague as to what that actually meant. The novel was clear. Her family grew up in poverty. She'd always seen everyone in her family struggle. Her brother cobbled together a little musical career and was maybe getting to a point where he might be able to have a break as a singer. But then along came Landini, a woman 15 years his brother's senior. She feared that Landini would ruin any chance her brother had of success. Landini had been quite clear that she was not going to offer any help to Hugh. She would be about herself and her own career. And you get the idea that Hugh would be subsumed in Landini's shadow. And not only that, because of her age, while Landini wasn't quite a has-been, career was headed for an inevitable decline. Leslie pleaded with Landini, but to no avail. She even laughed at her. And according to Dr. Swan, Leslie told him that she wished Landini were dead. It should also be noted that present in the house at the time of the murder were Jim Dinsdale, a tavern owner who was also a friend of Landini who drove her from Reno, as well as Mr. Ward's cook. However, the novel doesn't treat either of them as suspects, and it should be noted that the Broadway play actually omits them entirely. Now, while Chan was ready to hand the case off to local law enforcement was not quite so ready, as it was represented in the person of young County Sheriff Don Holt. Holt was the son of the longtime sheriff who had gone blind and really never had a murder case, and is more than happy to have Chan's help in solving the case. Sheriff Holt is also immediately taken with Leslie Beaton from the very first scene they share. With that, you pretty much have all the pertinent facts and information, understand everything that's gone before in the first 6 episodes of the Landini murder case. I hope you found this informative and found it helpful. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.